You're listening to Conversation Balloons, interviews with experts and friends about how the generations can help each other thrive. I'm your host, Leah Farish. Check out this episode. Emma Lembke is joining us today. She's a 21-year-old digital youth advocate. Her major is in political science at Washington University, St. Louis. And in 2020, she founded the Log Off movement to empower Gen Z in their relationship with social media. In 2021, she founded Technically Politics to promote big tech legislation and policy reforms to protect kids and give them a voice on consumer tech issues. She's the co-chair of the Design It For Us coalition, and she's a Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Young Defender. We're glad to have you on, Emma.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
You know, you've talked to the New York Times and Fox News and Bloomberg and 60 Minutes and a U.S. Senate committee, and I'm honored to be in that august body of people who've gotten to hear your voice on this subject.
Well, I'm so honored to be having the conversation, and I always say that each conversation is just equally as important because the more that we talk about this, the more that people will begin to take action. So just very, very thankful to be having the conversation today.
Well, I appreciate it. Maybe some of our audience has been living under a rock and hasn't gotten to hear you tell your own story of the harms of social media in your life. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got social media at the age of 12, and that was in the sixth grade. And I distinctly remember being one of the last of my friend groups allowed via my parents' rule to get social media. Eventually, after pestering for a while, they relented and they allowed me to get on. And I remember when I entered, I assumed that there had to be something so magical about these apps because my friends, when they all went on, their attention was pulled away from me in person and kind of beautiful moments of connection through games of tag and just conversation and down towards their screens. And I remember thinking that there had to be something then so magical that allowed for that to happen. And I remember when I first went on social media and Instagram, those moments of magic abounded. I remember, following everyone from Kim Kardashian to Olive Garden and through the ranks. And with each person that I followed, I felt as though I was connecting with the world around me in a new and different way. That only lasted for, a month or two before the Mirage wore off. And I quickly realized that social media wasn't magic. In reality, what it was a carefully constructed and designed mirage that was predicated on maximizing my attention at the cost of my well-being. So what that meant is as I continued to scroll through these apps, specifically Instagram at this point, my mental health suffered. So I found myself, bombarded by the quantification of my worth through likes and comments and followers, and that really deepened my depression, worsened my anxiety. I felt specifically as a young female that the exposure to unrealistic body standards and just general recommended harmful content that was being pushed via algorithms at me, dieting content, pro-anorexic content, it led me towards harmful directions, specifically as it related to my own disordered eating. And no matter the harm I incurred, though, both mental and physical, I kept scrolling. And that was because addictive features like the endless, persuasive design features like the endless scroll, push notifications, all of that kept me hooked. And it wasn't until, I reached the ninth grade that I had a breaking point. I remember the buzz of a notification and I had a Pavlovian response to reach and grab for it. And between the buzz and the grab, I asked myself something that was really important. I finally asked, why? Why on earth do I allow these, apps to control me? I'm someone who values my control. How has this happened? And from there, it led to a stream of other questions in line of inquiry, ranging from, how does an algorithm work to what are, the benefits of increased digital mindfulness techniques. All of that being said, what I eventually found was that social media was something that was going to be really difficult in my life to navigate without putting in personal boundaries and without wanting to push for change at a systemic level.
Wow, you've said a mouthful. I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit of item by item things that you mentioned about the effects on yourself that we're finding, of course, are widespread. Uh, Depression, do you think that exposure to things that hurt your self image, self esteem, were the main feature, or was it more exposure to doom and gloom news items, worry about, the environment and hysteria about, you know, social issues? What was, what affected your mood the most?
I'd say it's an amalgamation of all of those different pieces. I think obviously social media algorithms uplift content that they know will engage you and hook you to maintain your attention, to be able to then, learn more about you, to be able to feed you ads,
Mhm.
to be able to make more money. And that parasitic loop, I think, caught me. And in that loop, what I found was I was being fed extreme content. So, what algorithms feed you is going to be an extreme version of reality. It's called outrageification. It gets more comments, it gets more likes. Um, I was fed, a very warped version of the world. I was fed, obviously, sad, anxious events got more attention. I was fed that as a young individual. Imagine growing up and basically having a world of tragedies and horrors on your phone being fed at you at all times. But I specifically felt that I fell victim to harmful content that was aimed at keeping on young girls. So pro anorexic content, videos of stick thin models, dieting videos, and then specifically, these pictures that just allude or implicitly promote, disordered eating, that are, 200 calorie a day fasting guides, things like that.
Did it interfere with your sleep?
Oh, absolutely. I am not one to tout a healthy, or I wasn't one to tout for a while, a healthy sleep schedule. And that was my own demise. But at that point in my life, I felt as though I could not detach from scrolling, and I could not detach from the social world that I was within. So, what that meant is I would go to sleep with my phone in hand, and I would wake up with my phone in hand,
Wow.
both of which were incredibly detrimental to maintaining a healthy sleep schedule, which everyone knows is incredibly important for proper cognitive functioning.
Well, and it can even affect your emotions, your outlook, and
Yeah.
yeah, a sense of hopelessness, confusion, all those things. You're in a fog, and
Mhm.
but it didn't affect your grades particularly, right?
It did not. Um, and I would chalk that up to the fact that I'm the type of person I am is someone who, one of the reasons why I might not have a great sleep schedule in college is because I'm up studying pretty late. So I'm a pretty industrious person. But I will say that oftentimes it made me rethink or reconsider if I could have even higher grades if I unplugged. Would I be able to retain more? Or more fundamentally, I wanted to improve my learning process, not just my quick recall.
Hmm.
And obviously, sleep is very important for long term memory. So that's one thing that I have over time begun to really prioritize is how can I get more sleep, not just to improve my grades, not just to improve, everything else, but to improve my longer learning.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's not just the absolute time spent on your device, but also the blue light that comes from the screen. It's a light source, and it does affect our brains in ways that I don't think we still fully understand. And I think the scrolling, this vertical scrolling, or sometimes lateral scrolling, the exposure to information and the way it's presented is not conducive to what I found in my students in teaching college through the years was they became less able to apply a principle to a new situation. They could master a bit of information very quickly and discuss it, but the next week it was not there for them to access. It was like it was completely gone. And I think a book presents information in a different way than a little screen. And I'm very sorry to see so many e-textbooks that students are accessing just on their phone. I don't think you can relate one idea to another that readily. But I'm glad that your grades didn't suffer that much. That's important. 88% of educators, according to one survey, believe that excessive screen time affects their students' ability to concentrate and creates other learning challenges, like with memory and comprehension. Well, let's talk for a minute about body image. You've mentioned anorexia sites. I'll just come out and say you're a lovely young lady. You shouldn't have been made to feel less than at any point, nor should any person, just by looking at social media. And this was going on even when we only had desktop computers. There were websites that were actually encouraging girls who wanted to lose weight, teaching them ways that they could conceal their weight loss, teaching them ways to fool their parents. I'm not going to even list those tips because we don't want to educate people in that way, but it actually turned them away from their parents and those living in their family. I think there's an issue with anorexia of wanting to individuate from your parents. It's a very devious, kind of ingenious way of rebelling, kind of imperceptible, and can escape parents' notice for such a long time. Did you get exposed to that kind of material, or was it just seeing the images of skinny females that made you think about anorexia?
I think it was a combination. So I was fed some pretty shocking content. And I say shocking because, like you said, like, there are websites and there are pages that explicitly promote anorexia. They'll come out and they'll say, here are the list of things that you can do to avoid being caught by your parents. I never got fed that. I don't think many people have, at least on average, in terms of the young girls that I've spoken to. It's nothing as explicit as that. It's more implicit. It's, these horrible pictures that I'll have screenshotted on my phone that I kept in a folder to just have as evidence of stick thin models that had like bowls of food and then the calorie counts. And then that was kind of, look at my 200 calorie day. Videos that were like, that were glorifying the number of calories that were consumed being below a certain point. That was not healthy for any young individual. Excessive exercise videos, excessive in the sense that, no young person should be expected to exercise, over, who has time for over like an hour to two every day, and it's, expecting you to exercise for like four. Things like that were perpetually shot at me by the algorithm. And, I will say the algorithm does a phenomenal job too of masking the content that it does give young people. Because, like I said, it's implicit. You could say, oh, this is just content for healthy eating. When in reality, when it becomes more nefarious is when it is specifically targeted at young people at such large quantities and amounts repeatedly. Because to your point, this has been around. Most of the issues with social media when it comes to, like bullying, when it comes to like anorexic content, harmful content, that existed prior to the internet. It's just the way in which that content is distributed by a recommender algorithm that it becomes more harmful.
Mm-hmm. What about anxiety? Did you experience anxiety? Well, what caused those feelings?
I think the anxiety was largely caused by implicit, unspoken, yet widely understood social norms online. For instance, you always want to have a higher follower count than your following account, things like that, which I currently do not have because I don't care. But at that point in my life, I maintained it to a T. Things like that, wanting to have the highest numbers of likes, and if it wasn't above a certain point, me and I know some other friends of mine would delete it. We'd delete the posts. Things like that were very stress inducing for me because it felt as though I had to live up to all of these expectations and hit certain benchmarks on metrics that if I didn't hit would cause immense amount of anxiety. And you could say that that's self-imposed, but you ask so many young people, and many people feel the same way about needing a high follower count, needing a low following count, needing to have a certain number of likes, deleting videos if they don't have that. It's generally understood in the ecosystem that we are within that there are unspoken norms, and oftentimes those norms can be very stress-inducing when you don't meet them.
You have, these organizations that you founded. I would imagine it would be very challenging to manage your online time when you're trying to raise the visibility of these things you're committed to and interested in the reaction that you're getting. How have you managed your own time and attention in launching these initiatives?
A great question, and it has been incredibly difficult, and one that I have done not only with, not with pure grace, but with a lot of trial and error. So, what I have done is I have just worked very hard to cultivate a sense of digital mindfulness, a sense of, maintaining my intentionality and presence in the moment to ensure that no matter if I decide to go on social media or go on my devices, it is in a way that serves me and aligns with my values rather than serving those of tech companies. I think it was very important for me to make the distinction between passive and active screen time and understanding
Mm.
passive screen time has no function or feature in my life, and I don't believe it should in many others. For me, active screen time was ways in which I could use the online world to benefit me and to benefit my experience, and that I needed to track to ensure that I wasn't online all the time, but that it served and benefited me. So I turned to that active screen time and I asked myself, every time I go on my device, I need to ask myself, why am I going on? What is my intention? And do I want to be on? For how long? Asking these mindful prompts and questions repeatedly over and over instilled a sense in me that each time I went online, I needed to have an intention and a clear set path on why I was online, or else it wasn't worth my time. And keep in mind, I don't do that every single time I open up a laptop or my phone. I try to do it as often as possible. And I still find as though there are periods when I'm looking at three different monitors right now. I'm writing a script for a talk that I'm giving in New Jersey. Like there are times when I'm going to be on much more than others. But as long as my intention is clear, then that's when I feel as though I'm in the green zone. I'm using my screen time in a way that serves and benefits me. And as long as that is paired with in person, in real life connection that I find meaningful, if I have that balance, I feel as though I have done everything to the best of my abilities and I'm successful in terms of building better screen time habits and usage that fits my life.
Yeah, I heard you say elsewhere that you can start engaging this issue by taking 10 or 15 minutes of reflection. What should happen during those 10 or 15 minutes?
During the 10 or 15 minutes, it depends. Some people like to use it more by following prompts. So I have prompts that I use that are, like what are some reasons you use social media? What are some unwanted impacts of social media that it's had on your life? What do you wish you had more time for in your day to day life? What are big goals you're working for that you need more energy for? How do you feel like social media has positively impacted your life? How do you feel like you've benefited from it? Those questions can lead a really, really productive session of reflection. And there are other people that I just suggest purely going online, going on your screen and scrolling for 10 minutes. And when you're scrolling, saying to yourself, okay, with each image, I'm going to be mindful and attentive to the present moment and how I feel. With each image, I'm going to stop and say, really ask. I always say, like, act like you're a toddler, so ask as many questions as possible. Why do I feel this way? Why How does this image, what does it invoke in me? How does my body feel right now? Am I tensed up? Who is this follower? Do I really need to be following them? Questions like that, and keep going for 10 to 15 minutes. You will find very quickly that your answers oftentimes are not aligned with how you're actually engaging online. So no matter which path you take, whether you take more of a reflective prompt path or if you take the path, just go through your phone and scroll, or both, I think they yield incredibly important information that can be used and repackaged to better understand how to move forward with your own digital usage in a way that is, productive and conducive to your experience and your life goals.
Hmm. Well, because we're a show about the generations, I just have to ask a little more about where your parents fit in. Of course, they gave you the phone. They were one of the last among your age cohort to let you have your own phone and get on social media. But then these impacts started really adversely affecting you. At what point do you think your parents became aware of that? Did you confide in them? Did they participate in solutions?
You know, it's funny. Don't think my parents truly ever understood. They didn't understand the extent of how much it was impacting me until they heard one of my first interviews of me telling my story. Um, because I think that oftentimes I've fallen victim to this, and many other young people have. I have not articulated my story. I have not been explicit and upfront about each, ebb and flow of how I was harmed or how felt like I benefited. Because I think that that conversation oftentimes has been stigmatized. Not many people are willing and able to talk through their digital experience because most people, accept it for how it is and just move on. My parents then, after that, we had many conversations where, they said to me, well, we didn't really know that you were that harmed. They tried everything. They, at one point with my sister, made her get a flip phone because she didn't put her phone outside of her room. And it was very funny watching as a younger sibling. But they tried and they really put in the effort. But I think it stands to represent, and it really serves to represent the reality that we're in, where you can put in as much work on your end as a parent, and as much effort, and you're never going to fully understand your kids' online experience and usage unless you talk to them and you ask them. So my parents never explicitly came up to me and said, Emma, why do you want to use social media? Like, how do you feel like it will benefit you? How can we be supportive in your journey? That conversation never happened, and nor do I blame them for the fact that it didn't happen. But that's kind of one of the things that I'm really preaching, in a lot of my work, is just the beauty and power of a productive conversation. The acronym that's used is listening with care, responding with love, care being curiosity and open mind, respect and empathy, responding with love being lots of questions, optimism, validation, and engagement. So it's very important that, later in my life, I had that type of conversation with my parents. But I didn't when I was younger, when it mattered. And that's why I think many parents need to have those types of conversations with their kids before they, listen to an interview of them giving a longer spiel about it
Yeah.
later in their life.
I remember in this moment in Romeo and Juliet when the nurse says, I think you better go ahead and marry this other guy. Juliet casts her out of the room and says, henceforth, my bosom and you shall be twain, shall be apart. I'm not going to confide in you anymore. I am going my own way, and you're not going to know what I'm thinking. And then she became vulnerable to suicide. And I think that cutting off of the parents and entering into this whole other secret world is something that's very common, like at Juliet's age, at your age, very important to find that um, independence from one's parents, but usually it comes a little too early and too completely in kids who then are damaged. And I'm glad that it didn't go that far with you.
Me too.
um,
I understand what you're saying, though. I think that the online world can oftentimes leave you as a young person with a weird sense of independence, but that independence is not always great. I wish that I would have had more protection, and I wish that I hadn't gotten on when I was as young, because I lost more time with my friends that I could have been spent playing tag. I lost more moments of connection with my parents. And also, when you're thrown into the online world, you don't go in with, training wheels. You go in full steam ahead into the online world to which adults alike consume
mhm.
and engage. So you're really jumping into the deep end, and when you jump into the deep end with very little instructions, it can be very detrimental to one's mental health, physical health, and just general upbringing.
Yeah, our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, said it's time to support parents by putting up guardrails on digital platforms. 6 out of 10 girls said they were approached by strangers on social media in ways that made them feel uncomfortable. A survey of half of adolescents said being on social media made them feel worse about their bodies. And the analogy he drew was, government has decided to require seatbelts in car seats. Yes, it interferes a little bit with freedom, but there's also a necessity there to protect kids. The predators know kids better than the kids know themselves, and they have a tremendous incentive to victimize kids in various ways. Someone else said it's giving a kid a phone and exposure to social media is like throwing them into the pool when they can't swim. And that's exactly what you were talking about. One survey found that youngsters who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media double their risk for anxiety and depression. And of course, Jonathan Haidt, with his many charts and graphs and insights, has demonstrated that when especially girls started getting on social media around 2012, we got quadrupling of self-harm and suicide among girls. With boys, it was less, but boys are more engaging with video games and more violent media than girls. And it's not curated at all. It's simply guided by uh, shock value and commercial interest. At what point did you realize that you are the product that's being bought and sold? At what point did you realize these companies have a commercial interest in getting you
Mhm.
hooked?
That was when I began to do research after the ninth grade. That was when I reached my breaking point. I had that moment of realization where I knew that I needed to unplug from my devices and log off from my social media platforms for a little bit of time. And in that time, I began to do minimal research. And that research began with, is social media bad? Question mark. Great question, right? All my college professors would love it. And it eventually devolved and it unwound into, you know, a plethora of knowledge. It led me towards a deeper understanding of the attention economy, of surveillance capitalism, of these topics that I had no idea existed and that were just foundational in understanding, like you said, that there was a great incentive and great commercial interest in maximizing my attention at the cost of my well-being. And it was then that I really felt emboldened to take action because I was so frustrated. To be quite frank, I was pissed off. I was angry that I was being used as a pawn or as a product for advertisers. And I thought to myself, I am so much more than a like, a comment, a follower. I'm so much more than a user. I am a person. And that really propelled me in my advocacy work and continues to propel me because nothing has changed. We are still referred to as users because that is how we are seen. We are seen as metrics, not people. And that fundamentally is one of the greatest issues that we face because if we are always going to be seen as metrics and, money, if we're always going to be seen as, possible sources of greater income and money for these companies, why would they prioritize our well-being? It's not in the interest of the company or the stakeholders or the shareholders. So I think I realized it in the ninth grade. It's propelled my work till now, but I continue to be frustrated whenever I remember and realize and am faced with the reality that we are in today.
I read somewhere that one of the most effective arguments with teens against smoking is to tell them that the advertisers and the manufacturers of tobacco want to make money off of you. And that really makes teens indignant to see that they're just being sought for commercial purposes. And that's true for your path as well. Let's close with a few ideas about how you can control your appetite for social media, especially in the summer when time is unstructured and it may be more tempting. I heard a pastor say the other day, if you don't control your appetite, you will never be satisfied. You it, it's kind of counterintuitive. You think I keep doing more so I'll find satisfaction, but actually it's at the front end where we really have the agency. And we can control our appetite for social media. I don't want to encourage anorexia. That's certainly not what's going on. But I've found that fasting 1 day a week from food has somehow affected my appetite for social media. I'm just a little bit less interested in it the last few weeks. And there are things that we can try to that can manage our consumption of this. What do you find?
I tout and I stand behind what I call the WRT method, which is one, finding out in this free time, this unstructured free time, your why. Really invest in one of those reflective activities. Ask yourself, what are the values I hold dear? And align your social media usage to those values, because that's how you're going to accomplish your goals in your life and you're going to live a more fulfilled, productive, worthwhile life. The second is R. It is based off of a TED Talk I listened to via the suggestion on a Substack by Jonathan Haidt, but it's from Catherine Price, who is an individual who's written a book called How to Break Up with Your Phone, How to Have More Fun. There are the Art of Having More Fun. Phenomenal author and health journalist. And she said, you need to have fun. You need moments of rebellion. You need moments where you have playful deviance, she calls it. And I call moments of pushing back against the status quo in big tech as these moments of rebellion. So I encourage mindful moments of rebellion. How can you rebel in ways that will align your tech usage with your values of your life? That can be taking smaller steps, getting the phone out of your bedroom and out of private spaces. So the bathroom and the bedroom, I believe that the phone should never be in. The next step can be downloading software so that your time is more closely aligned with and allocated in areas of your life that you want. So download like the app. I always say this great app that was generated and developed by Gen Z software developers. They're phenomenal. We are close with them, called Present. Download Present, or another software app that will allow you to track your screen time and put in, levels of friction between you and addictive technologies. It will buffer, it will stop you when you're going into one, anything like that, really helpful. And a third thing that you could do as a moment of rebellion is just to create phone-free spaces. Where in your house will you allow yourself to have a phone? Where in public will you allow yourself to have phone? Any of these things, any of these moments of rebellion can be really, really helpful in building a better relationship. And then the T in the QRT method is just talking. You've got to talk with one another. Jonathan Haidt is the biggest proponent and believer in collective action in solving this issue. And we're not going to be able to collectively act if we don't collectively speak and talk to one another about our experiences and talk with one another and bring each other into these moments of rebellion, these moments where we are building better relationships with technology.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you are concerned about the face-to-face interaction, and that has to be consciously built. I read a study that said that people who were talking to someone who had their phone visible, even though it was just within reach, they weren't even touching it, and the people talking to them felt less engagement and attention from that person. So it can really damage our interactions, even to have it there. Is there a closing thought or a tip, especially for people of your generation, for managing this very voracious um, menace that is looking to grab onto them every moment?
I would just say the first step is better understanding one's own experience. I felt that I was able to really free myself from the shackles that was my tech addiction when I was able to articulate how I was harmed and how I was benefited from the devices that I found myself scrolling for hours a day. So, what I'd say to each young person is really understand your digital experience. How have you engaged with it thus far? How do you want to engage with it thus far? Ask these important questions And those questions will lead you in really meaningful and fruitful directions.
Well, thank you very much for your insights and all the work you're doing on this, Emma. And we'd love to have you back and talk more about your activism, how you're actually engaging with legislation and policy change. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Conversation Balloons. Look for more episodes and information at leahfarish.com. That's LEAHFARISH.com. And follow me on Facebook and Instagram.